Joining with computer audio. Joining with computer audio. Good evening, boys and girls. Alrighty, cool. Okay, so we are all here. We're ready to start. Linda is joining. Everyone is joining. People are joining. Cool. All right. So sorry for starting a bit early tonight as opposed to yesterday, but I've got to disappear tomorrow to do some stuff. So let us go and start our class. As usual, we are going on to SlideShare and away we go. Cool. All right. So from last week, we were on Feliforms part 1. We did the kitty cats. This week, we're doing Viverridae, which are a little bit different. Okay. As always, there's books of the week. There's only one book this week, and it's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. Excellent book. Very good reading. Also a good audiobook. You can get it from all the usual places. Bargain Books has definitely got it. I saw it there yesterday. Okay. Cool. So going back to Feliforms. So the Feliforms are broken into two superfamilies, the Felidaeans, which are cats and linsangs. What are linsangs? We're going to do that today. And the Viverridae, say that 3 times, which are civets and their relatives, which is, in my opinion, a lot cooler, actually. Okay, so to recap where we were. A week ago, we did the canids and the caniforms, which are these guys over here, wolves, bears, badgers, sea otters, and seals, and all those guys. And then this group over here, which we're looking at, are the Viverridae, the felids, and all those guys over here. So 2 distinct forms, the caniforms and the feliforms. Okay, so beyond obviously diet, the fact that caniforms are omnivores and feliforms are true carnivores with some exceptions. One of the big differences, of course, is the actual hearing of cats and dogs. When I say cats and dogs, I mean all caniforms, including bears. When I say cats, I'm including mongooses as well. I'm just being lazy. Okay, they're not cats and dogs. Okay, so caniforms have a single-chambered auditory bullae, which is basically just an inner ear and middle ear. If you look over here, this is it over here. It's just one little pocket in the skull. By contrast, if you look at the feliforms, they've actually got a double-chambered auditory bullae, which actually gives them far more accurate and far better hearing. So you can see over here, it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but you can see 2 chambers, 2 bubbles next to each other, and again here. So caniforms have just got one single-chambered auditory bullae, like us. In fact, like pretty much all mammals. We've only got one, whereas cats are unique. When I say cats, I mean all feliforms. They are unique in that they've got a double-chambered auditory bullae. Okay, so going forward, we're going to talk about some civets. Now, the African palm civet is part of the NANDINIIDAE family, and he's the only member. So palm civets are only distantly related to true civets. They're actually not very related at all to civets. It's just they have a common name. In fact, they're more closely related to true cats. Far more closely related to true cats. So the name civet is a bit of a misnomer in the situation. And African palm civets are found throughout Central and Eastern Africa, and they're not in any way related to the Asian palm civets, which we all know about for the coffee. And unlike cats and true civets, African palm civets are almost entirely herbivorous. So although they're predators, or carnivores by their grouping, they've again, like pandas, evolved to a level of an almost exclusive herbivorous diet. They do occasionally eat some animal matter, but it's really a small bit. The occasional egg, the occasional bit of meat that's left around, but almost everything is vegetation. And throughout Central and Eastern Africa, they're probably the most common small carnivore. They're not a true carnivore, but by grouping, they're carnivores. Remember, we're not talking about the diet, we're talking about their relationship. Okay, so this little guy over here, he looks a bit like a genet, but again, more closely related to a cat. So they have these pungent scent glands on the lower abdomen and between the 3rd and 4th toes, and they're absolutely weak. And they leave these glands, they leave these scent marks wherever they are, go over the trees, and they actually mark their territory just by walking over them. And unlike most feliforms, their foot structure is actually palmate, so more like the plantigrade structure. So they walk on a flat hand as opposed to walking on the ridge and actually on their toes, like dogs and cats do. And also, unlike all other caniforms, the Eutleri bolae is made of cartilage instead of bone. And again, this is not really important, but the reason for this is they don't really need to have good hearing. They're not predators, they're not hunting, so they don't have to have hyper-developed ears. Although they've got all the mechanisms there, but it's just spare parts, and they don't really need to use them. They need to use their sense of smell for eating fruit more than anything else. Now, the LINSANGS are also closely related to cats. And there are only 2 species, and they're limited to Southeast Asia. The banded linsang, which is this little guy over here, and the almost identical, which I have a hard time telling them apart, but there are some differences, spotted linsang, which is this little guy over here. And you might say they look like genets, but genetically they're actually far more closely related to cats. And they are true carnivores. They hunt small birds, rodents, whatever they can eat. Now, going on to the separate groups, so those were the Feliforms. Now, the Viverridae, which are, again, the Feliforms, but very different, very, very different. So, Viverridae are omnivores for the most part, but the range of diet varies from species to species. Some of them are almost 95% herbivorous, some of them are almost 95% carnivorous. So, it ranges from species to species. And Viverridae are considered to be the most primitive in their predation behavior, and they don't clean their kills like true cats. Cats pluck feathers, they pull the hair out. Lions are famously known for having these really, really abrasive tongues. They lick the hair off their prey after eating them, after killing them, so that they can have a clean meal. Viverridae, they just munch them, feathers and all. So you often find little bits of hair and feather in their actual scat. And this is the fun part. The word viverrid comes from Latin and literally means ferret, but they're nowhere related to ferrets. So it's a bit odd in that respect. It just comes from a Latin name. And they're omnivorous and opportunistic, and they have no real significant impact on local ecology. If they're not there, they're not there. If they're there, they're there. And they're more just space fillers in terms of ecology. There's a vacuum, and there's a niche available, so they take opportunity. But if they were gone tomorrow, ecologically, they wouldn't really be missed. They're not a keystone species, as we call them. They just exploit whatever's really around. So they survive in the niches that caniform mucilage. Remember we talking mucilage, which were mongooses, sorry, not mongooses, ferrets, weasels, otters, badgers, those fellows, whatever those guys, raccoons as well, whatever those guys have not exploited, these guys will come in along and basically exploit. They are the ecological equivalents of muscelids, even though they're related closely to cats. And raccoons are probably the closest ecological equivalent. The raccoons dominate the Americas, whereas the Viverridae dominate Asia and Africa. And raccoons, remember, are more closely related to dogs. And Viverridae play a minor role in seed dispersal, especially with members of the Rubiaceae family. The Rubiaceae family is a coffee family. I'm sure you've all heard of civet dropping coffee, where they actually make it out of it. And civets, and actually all Viverridae go nuts for members of the Rubiaceae family because they're quite tasty. So there are 4 subfamilies with 29 species. I didn't really think you realize there are that many species. The VIVERRINAE, which are the true civets. The Hemigallinae, which are the small palm civets. Remember, this is not related to the African palm civets. These are the true palm civets. The Paradoxurinae and the GENETTAe. So the large palm civets and the GENETS. So true civets are almost exclusively nocturnal. They have perfume oils that are milked from the perineal glands, which are these glands around the anus, which produce civetone, and that's what they use in perfumes. So one civet can produce maybe 4 grams a month, and they need to milk these animals consistently. So they have thousands of civets in factories, and they milk them, and unfortunately, that's what you're putting on your skin. You're putting anal juice on your skin when you want to smell pretty. They've synthesized it recently, but for many, many years, it was a major export. Now, interestingly, they also have enlarged anuses, which gives these really, really large droppings, and it confuses people. They think they're dealing with a larger predator, but a civetry, which is the technical term for a civet latrine, has these really big droppings, really large scat, and it can look almost like the size of a lion scat. And the African civet is capable of eating toxic invertebrates like millipedes. They don't feel any side effects, and you often find millipedes shells, the chitinous exoskeletons in the millipedes, in the CIVETS droppings, and they have no adverse effects. And civets, because they're elongated faces and their small eyes, tend to focus on smell rather than sight. They have very undeveloped eyes, but their sense of smell is excellent for a feliform. So this is over here, it's skull. And if you look at the skull over here, he's got these rather blunt teeth and rather underdeveloped canines. The canines aren't these long piercing canines, they're quite blunt. And he does have quite a large sagittal crest, which shows he's got quite a bit of biting power. And that again is because he's opportunistic. He's not looking to kill things. He's more like just taking opportunities of eating vegetation, crushing fruit, eating birds' eggs, and that sort of thing. So that's the diet the animal has. He's also got quite a robust face with a elongated face, and his eyes are quite situated quite far back. So you can see the diet and his whole lifestyle is not so focused on using his eyes to hunt. Now, the VIVERRINAE are the true civets. There's 6 species: the large Indian civet, which is throughout India; the small Indian civet, which is this cute little guy over here, looks a bit like a genet; and of course the African civet, which is truly gorgeous. Okay, and the Hemigallinae, which are the small palm civets, and this is the banner palm civet, this little guy over here; Hose's palm civet, which is this fellow over here; and Oswin's palm civet, these little guys. And these guys are prolific throughout Asia. Africa doesn't really have any a major number of palm civets, but throughout Asia you get significant numbers of palm civets, and they are again mostly focused on vegetation to greater or less extent. The large palm civets, which are responsible for that civet shit coffee that you drink, are the golden palm civet, who's absolutely beautiful. And the Butterong, otherwise known as the bear cat, he's monstrous. He's the size of a medium-sized dog, gorgeous creature, critically endangered now due to the pet trade and also because they're poached for their skins and for traditional medicines. And the small tooth palm civet, which is also looks quite similar to a bush baby. Now, of course, finally are the genets, which we all know from the suburbs of South Africa. And there are 17 species, and they're all limited to Africa, with the exception of one species occurring throughout Europe, or throughout Southern Europe. And that's the common genet, which we get in South Africa as well, otherwise known as the small spotted genet, the large spotted genet, who has large spots by contrast, and the king genet, who is just a little bit fluffier than the others, but basically the same. And the genets, again, are almost exclusively carnivorous, but they do take some vegetation in their diet. So they are the more carnivorous of the viverrids. And they are, a lot of people seem to think they're closely related to cats, and they are feliforms, but remember they are more closely related to mongooses, hyenas, and civets. Now, Herpestidae are hyenas and mongooses, and these guys have a native range throughout the whole of Africa and throughout Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. And you don't really find them any further north. They don't seem to do well in colder climates and open grasslands. They tend to thrive in tropical areas and bushy areas, and they don't seem to have a good handle on any colder climates. And that's where the mucelids, the caniforms, outplace them. This entire area north over here is the realm of caniforms, and they've just been outcompeted there. So some interesting things about these guys is that they make use of latrines to mark their territory. All the Herpestidians make use of latrines to various or great extents. And I'm sure you'll start noticing some patterns here. And they also communicate via markings of anal pastings to indicate their territory, reproductive status, their social rankings, etc., etc., etc. So they all do this. And all species make use of burrows to greater or lesser degrees. Starting to sound like species that we recognize. Now, the Herpestidae are the family of mongooses, and they're a highly diverse family, and they're found throughout Africa and Asia. They're not found in the Americas, okay? They've never managed to exploit the Americas, mainly because the Bering Straits has always been frozen, and they don't do well in colder climates. They prefer tropical conditions, and they've never crossed over officially into the Americas. Now, many species have been introduced to islands, especially like Hawaii, Barbados, a few of those other areas, and have all but annihilated the local wildlife. A lot of those island species have no ecological evolution towards surviving predation, and when predators just move in there, they clean them out. So one thing I'm always sure you've all heard of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi from Rudyard Kipling, and they love to hunt snakes, particularly snakes with neurotoxic venom. Those are the elapids, cobras, and their kin. and mongooses are immune to neurotoxic snake venom. Mucelids in other parts of the world, especially colder climates, are the ecological equivalent of herpestids, and one group or the other will replace each other in the wild. So wherever you find the one group, the other group will generally not be surviving. So, but mucelids tend to thrive in colder climates, whereas herpestids tend to thrive in more tropical conditions. It just seems to be the way they seem to operate. Now, mongooses are immune to only neurotoxic venom, as far as I know. They're not immune to hemotoxic or cytotoxic. I stand to be corrected, but nothing I could find any evidence for that anywhere. So the reason for this is they actually do it via a slightly different process to badgers, especially the honey badger, who uses these modified neuroreceptors. Mongooses have a process called glycosylation, which is they actually bind the carbohydrates in their bodies to the venom proteins, and this stops them from interfering with the nerve receptors. And they also have these mutated receptors that actually helps or makes it very difficult for the neurotoxins to actually block the signals. So these two processes together just make it very difficult for a cobra to kill a mongoose, and it gives a mongoose a very good opportunity just to take the animal out. And again, depending on the species, it does vary from species to species. Some species who are almost exclusively like Selous mongoose, which is highly specialized in hunting cobras, they have very high levels of resistance. But something like the ruddy mongoose from Sri Lanka and India, who does not focus excessively on snakes, has lower resistances to neurotoxins. They can still handle a bite, but it's not a unilateral across the board. They're all super immune. There are degrees of resistance between species. Now, mongooses share a common ancestor with hyenas and have evolved from common Viverridae ancestors. And mongooses are broken into two subfamilies: the HERPESTINAE, which are the solitary mongooses found throughout the old world, and the MUNGOTINAE, which are the social mongooses, which are limited almost exclusively to Africa. So the HERPESTINAE, which are the solitary mongooses, there are 24 species amongst 8 genera. There's the striped neck mongoose from India and Sri Lanka. There's the yellow mongoose, which is found throughout South Africa. Interestingly, the yellow mongoose is a major vector for rabies in sub-Saharan Africa, and they can carry the disease for extended periods of time without actually showing any symptoms, but they can still pass it on. So you should never interact with a friendly yellow mongoose, even if it comes up to you. This guy was actually, I took this photo in Port Elizabeth, and he was just hanging around in the lawn, and you know, even though he seems quite friendly, you don't interact with him. And the white-tailed mongoose, which is found throughout sub-Saharan Africa as well. The MONGOTINAE, which are the social mongooses, and there are 11 species, far less diverse. And these guys include the banded mongoose. We all have these in our suburbs, super cute. The meerkats, yes, meerkats are just mongooses, even though it's also called the surrogate. And the dwarf mongoose, which is arguably the most cutest creature I've ever seen in my life. So adorable, absolutely adorable. Okay, now weasels are ecological equivalents of mongooses. There's a lot of evolutionary convergence. They're very different. Remember, the ones that caniform, the ones that feliform, and they look very similar. You'd have a hard time telling them apart. The difference is that weasels are plantigrade or palmate in their foot structure, and mongooses are digitigrade, like a cat. So they don't walk on a whole flat foot like a human or a bear. They walk on their, like a cat's foot structure, which is the front part of the foot and the toes. And weasels also and mongooses have different attack strategies for predation. So weasels tend to skulk and stalk and act as ratters, dragging their prey out and throttling them, going for more of a direct, very similar to a dog-like attack pattern. Whereas mongooses hunt more like cats. They stalk, they pounce, they go for throat attacks, and they just their whole mechanisms of attack are slightly different. Also, mongooses tend to have a slightly slower metabolism, so they don't thrive in cold conditions, and because of this, they also don't hunt as regularly as weasels. Weasels have a much higher metabolism, and they actually burn a lot hotter. And they just tend to go for a lot more food. So some weasels kill like up to 24 rodents in a night. Like the least weasel, he's a voracious predator. And they are ecological equivalents. They behave the same way and they have the same ecological role, even though they are unrelated. Now, one of these is a mongoose skeleton and one of these is a weasel skeleton, and I would challenge you to tell them apart. Okay, if none of you guys can tell the difference, okay, so the top is a mongoose skeleton and the bottom is a weasel skeleton. As you can see, almost identical builds. The difference is the auditory bullae, so one is a single, the other is a double. This guy has actually got a palmate foot structure. And if you look over this guy over here, he's not on a palmate foot structure, he's actually got a digitigrade foot structure. So slightly different, but even their skulls are slightly bigger. What's interesting is that the weasel actually has got a much larger cranial cavity, which indicates he's got a proportionately a larger brain, which means he's probably a smarter creature. And the caniforms generally are smarter. Bears, dogs, badgers, they're all hyper intelligent, whereas the feliforms, to be quite blunt, are pretty stupid comparatively. Okay, so HYENIDAE. Everyone loves hyenas. And hyenas have the lowest species diversity of all the carnivores. And they're hyper carnivores, meaning that they just eat meat. And they have highly specialized digestion for bone. They can go through bone like butter. That's one of the reasons why their feces, why their scat is green when they're defecated, because they actually dissolve bone material. And that gives that rather than that blackish brown color to the feces, it turns a greenish color. Okay, so historically they occur throughout the entire world. There were even hyenas in Europe. There were hyenas as far as England. India had huge populations of spotted hyenas. There were even spotted hyenas in Russia until 12,000 years ago. And the rise of man's agriculture basically drove them into extinction everywhere in the world except for Africa and the Indian subcontinent. So there used to be spotted hyenas as far as France up until 12,000 years ago. Say lions survived a bit longer. Lions were found in Spain and Italy until about 6,000, even as early as 3,000 years ago, and lions survived in Greece until about 3,000 years ago. So hyenas were everywhere, and only recently, 12,000 years is just the other day, so only recently they've been driven out. So this is a hyena skull. What you'll notice is that he's got this significant sagittal crest over here with this wraparound bend over here, which allows more anchorage. A lot of the predators, the carnivores, have just got one solid, almost like mohawk type sagittal crest, where this guy comes out as a Y shape at the back, allowing for even more anchorage. He's got a really, really, really developed robust face. So you can have these serious crushing teeth. The carnosaur shear is overlapping rather than interlocking, which allows them to shear and crop rather than actually just slice. So you want something to crush and cut through things, almost like bolt cutters. And he's got these very blunt, very heavy incisors and canines as well. And actually, he doesn't have any gap. Unlike the true felids, he doesn't have any gaps in his teeth over here, okay? And the zygomatic process over here is also very robust, indicating he wants a lot of jaw strength. Over here, we've got a marsh mongoose skull. Now, I want you to look at the comparisons, and you can clearly see that they have a lot of similarities. Over here, we've got a civet skull, and you can again see with all the molars and the premolars and the canines and the incisors, the same sort of blunt, broad dentition, that overlapping shearing structure, almost like bolt cutter structure, very heavy zygomatic processes, that elongated base with their Y-shaped, sagittal crest, and just all around built for crushing and chewing. And that's the same thing with hyenas. So we can just see from the skull, without looking at anything else, that hyenas, mongooses, and civets have a relationship. They are related, even ignoring all the genetic evidence, which they've shown conclusively genetically they are related. But even back as far as the 1880s, they established that hyenas obviously had a relationship with mongooses and civets. So going back to the earliest hyenas, you've got a civet over here, and through the fossil evidence over time, we've seen bigger and bigger and bigger hyenas evolve. So hyenas first appeared on the fossil record around 22 million years ago. They initially evolved throughout Eurasia and gradually branched out into Africa. We like to think of hyenas as ours, they're not. They belong to Eurasia, much like most predators. And historically, two major groups of hyenas existed. the dog-like hyenas, and the last of these died out about 1.5 million years ago. Not too long ago, but still fairly long for in terms of human experience. And the bone-crushing hyenas, which are still found throughout Africa and Asia. The dog-like hyenas were very similar in the build of caniforms. They were a bit more robust, but they didn't have a sloped back. They had a straight back like a dog. And the bone-crushing hyenas had a far more robust build and a sloped back. And again, if you look at a striped hyena over here and a civet, you can again see the same sort of polar erection structure. You can see the same sort of banding. You can even see the same sort of similar facial markings. There's a lot of evolutionary leftovers with hyenas, especially the smallest, more primitive hyenas, the striped hyena over here. Very similar, and even the same black cresting on the polar erection. Just really, really interesting. It's so obvious when you actually when you know what you're looking at. So, the oldest known hyenas were large civet-like animals called Viverridae. And the dog-like hyenas survived in the Americas until 1.5 million years ago. And the most well-known fossil, where they've dredged up hundreds of times, is Chasmoporhynchus. And this is an artist's interpretation based on the fossils of what they would look like. Obviously, we don't know they had stripes, but we assume they have stripes, because most hyenas have stripes to greater or less extents. And hyenas typically have coarse coats with very little undercoats. And all species, except the spotted, have stripes to a greater or lesser degree. And hyenas have a notable overstep with their back feet, making walking far more energy efficient. They're not very good at running long distance, but they are very energy efficient at walking long distance. And their slope back makes it ideal for dragging and for leverage. Okay, so people think, oh, well, slope back's not very good, but remember, they're not meant to be long distance runners. They're actually almost like cranes or anchors. They want to get into their prey and drag it down. So they're highly effective predators, and almost as much as canines. And there's this myth going around them being purely scavengers. 95%. I'm going to say this again, 95% of hyenas' food is predation. Only 5% are scavenging. They are far more successful than cats. Cats range between 15 to 25% success rate. Hyenas are 30 to 60% success rate, compared to dogs, which are sometimes into the high 80s, even the 90s. But they're almost as good as canines. And one of their success stories is the fact that they are able to process animal matter that other predators can't. They can eat hooves, they can eat bone, they can eat skin, they can even digest hair to a lesser extent, which means that they can survive in places that other predators cannot survive. And again, very similar to the caniforms, they are more reliant on their nose than their eyes, and their hearing is actually pretty damn good. And the other hyena species are more opportunistic, but they hunt still. Again, they're not necessarily scavengers. They will scavenge, but they still hunt on their own. So the bite force of the hyena is incredible. It's higher than most cats, but proportional to their body mass and their size, the bite force quotient is pretty good, 117. But part of this comes from just there's that sagittal crest over here and there's blunt teeth. And they're rather for crushing than for shearing. That's one of the reasons why they have such high-powered bites. But the Tasmanian devil, which is a caniform, has a BFQ has the highest BFQ of all mammals, 181. So proportionately, although the hyena is bigger, so he would do more damage, proportionate to weight and size, the Tasmanian devil has got the strongest bite of, I think, out of any mammal. It's absolutely incredible. If you have a Tasmanian devil the size of a hyena, you take your arm off in one bite. So this is the skeleton of a hyena over here, and you can see the slope back structure, this broad, heavy shoulders, that thick neck, and that arcing on that sloping back, okay, with bent knees, which is, again, seems counterintuitive to a predator that you think would want to run down. But that whole structure is there to drag prey. He's got these long, these legs that are bent and naturally lean down and pull inward, so he can pull the prey down. And these large crushing teeth are there to rip and pull apart the prey. And they don't go for a quick kill. They hunt like dogs. They typically attack the flanks and the sides and the underbelly and rip the animal apart, and it dies from shock, which is still a very effective form of predation. And you can see over here, this is a hyena dragging down its prey rather than going for a neck shot. It basically turns itself, it locks onto its prey, and it just becomes dead weight and locks itself in, drags into the ground, and the prey can't get away, and gives the other hyenas to get a chance to get in there and rip the animal to pieces. This is, by contrast, a caniform skeleton and a hyena skeleton. And you can just see, although you think they're actually quite similar, you can see there's quite a lot of differences. The hyena's shoulders are much more powerful. You look at the scapula over here on the dog, it's much smaller. The face is more petite, more surgical, whereas the hyena is more robust. And also the chest is more elongated for greater lung capacity. And he's got longer legs for running, whereas the hyena has got these bent legs for anchorage. And again, if you look at the skull, it's very, very different. Of course, there's only 4 species: the spotted hyena, which is the largest and the only real pack hunter; the striped hyena, found throughout northern Africa as well as the Middle East and India; the brown hyena, which is found in southern Africa; and the aardwolf, which is found throughout Africa as well, the smallest. The aardwolf is a bit of a specialist though. So female hyenas are much larger than the males, and this is due to the high levels of androstenedione production in the prenatal and the postnatal development. So this is a hormone that produces testosterone. The female is subjected to high levels of testosterone in her prenatal development, and this is the reason why she becomes muscular, more man-like than the male. And the female actually has a pseudopenis, which is part of this high testosterone levels. And that's basically a fused clitoris and the vaginal sheath, which is protrude outwards, and the male actually has to penetrate her and force it inside out, inside her body. It just seems very, I don't know, messy, the whole process. But he basically has to invert her pseudopenis in order to mate with her. Seems quite painful. Okay, scent marking. Like all viverrids, hyenas have pungent anal scent glands. And interestingly, striped hyenas and aardwolves can actually spray their scent glands as an active chemical defense mechanism. So, like a skunk almost. And with regards to their ecology, hyenas are critical waste disposers. They clean areas of rotting meat and just foul carcasses. And they're important competition for other apex predators and keep lion numbers down, as well as keeping them mobile. Lions tend to become very lazy and dominant in an area and displace animals from an area. So when the hyenas come along and just give lions a bit of a rev for their money, the lions move around more, other animals circulate more, and the entire ecology is a bit healthier. Whereas if you have lions staying in one area, like dominating a waterhole, for example, none of the other animals will want to come there, and it just has a whole effect on the ecosystem. So hyenas have this wonderful little back and forth with the other big cats. And hyenas often practice sibling side, meaning that they keep their numbers down, and also ensuring that only the strongest survive. So they have a bit more of a ruthless pack mentality, whereas lions tend to favor all their cubs. And then you get a lot of weak genes forming in lion packs. And the females typically remain within the packs, while males are often kicked out and have to go live on their own or find a new pack. So hyenas are also important for soil ecology because they create these huge networks of like other viverrids and mongooses. They create these pockets in the soil, and they siphon nutrients and increase aeration. They live in groups, but they hunt, only the spotted hyena hunts cooperatively. Aardwolves are specialists, and they can consume up to 250,000 termites in an evening, and they play an important role in termite control. So this is an aardwolf skull here. He has very few teeth because, again, he doesn't eat much meat. He basically just has the canines as a defense mechanism. And this is a brown hyena den that we found out in the Mpumalanga. So we're going to talk about one of my favorite animals, the mega hyena. So this family included the Dinocrocutta, which went extinct about 2.5 million years ago. They were substantially larger than modern hyenas and dominated Central Asia. And it's thought that climate change and the rise of canines about 2 million years ago led to their extinction. So this is a Dinocrocutta's skull. And to give you an idea, this is the contrast in skull size. So you have a spotted hyena on the right and Dinocrocutta on the left, meaning that you would have a hyena that size. That's a saber-toothed cat next to it. Monstrous, absolutely monstrous. And thankfully we weren't around at that time. All right. So the Malagasy mongooses are endemic to Madagascar. Again, they're related to hyenas and mongooses. And there are 10 species on the island of Madagascar. The foss is one of them. The ringtail mongoose is another, this fellow over here. and the narrow stripe mongoose again. So Madagascar again has a lot of endemic species, and this owes to the fact that Madagascar broke off from Africa around 150 million years ago. SMILODON was another big cat which went extinct about 11,000 years ago, and he was a big boy. They were found throughout Eurasia, Africa, and even the Americas, but the largest lived in South America. He was a big guy over here. He went extinct around 11,000 years ago. So another big cat. The largest was Macuroides horribilis, and this guy lived in China around, I think, 2 million years ago. Obviously, we don't know what he looked like in terms of stripes, but that would have been about the size of Macuroides horribilis. Okay, absolutely monstrous cat. So we are lucky that we're living in a time where our big predators are not that big. So I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's presentation. I'm sorry we couldn't do it last week, but if you guys have any questions, we're going to be doing a Q&A on Saturday night. And again, this week I'm only doing one class because I'm off to Tula on Thursday. So I will try to do 2 classes again next week. If you guys have any questions, we've got 5 minutes. We can do a bit of Q&A, so you're welcome to put your microphones on.
How's it, Nick? Andre here. I saw when you done the one of the groups, I saw no reference in the names of the scientific names with reference to the groupings as such. Can that happen quite oftenly, where there's no reference to the scientific?
Where are you talking about? Which group?
I think it was the mongooses. I think it was the mongooses or one of them.
One of
your first.
What do you mean?
So in the scientific names, there was no common name that, like, for example, if we talk about lions and like leopards, will always be Panthera. There wasn't a common word like Panthera in the group.
Maybe I mistyped something somewhere, but I mean, pretty much all the mongooses, pretty much most of our predators, in fact, every mammal's got a common name, with some of the exceptions being bats. But pretty much all.
Civets. Sorry, it was the civets. There
civets.
We go. You see that? Yeah, there's no similar in the scientific names, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah, again, I mean, sometimes they just have casual common names, but they're not, as far as I know, they all have common names, especially with caniforms, because they've all been recorded and they've been well known for a fairly long time. So the caniforms, the carnivores tend to be well recorded, and most of them have common names. All of these civets over here have common names, as you can see.
Sorry, you misunderstood me. I was saying the scientific name.
Yeah.
There's no similar link in the scientific names.
Oh yeah, well that's because they're different genuses. So like for instance, you'll find that just because the genuses are different, but they'll belong to the same family. So you'll have, like, for instance, you get with cats, you got Felis and you got Panthera. Those are the 2 genuses. Even though the cats, they both belong to the Felidae family, but because they're just a little bit different, they do have different genus names.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Okay, cool. We can do Q&A properly on Saturday, and we'll discuss them more in depth. Is there any other questions? I've got a typed question. Hyenas, decomposers. They're a bit of everything. Remember that we define the term decomposer. It's not it's true decomposers. I wouldn't say the decomposers. I wouldn't even say detritivores. They are detritivores in the same way detritivores. Biltong is dead meat. So you could argue that humans are detritivores when we're eating the biltong. We didn't kill it. It's not fresh. It's been dried and it's been left to desiccate. So we're detritivores when we eat biltong. So I wouldn't say that they are any of those. They're predators. They're outright predators, but they're opportunistic predators. They will eat dead meat. But in the same way lions eat dead meat. I mean, people always think that lions don't eat dead meat. I saw a lion sit on a dead rhino for 2 weeks, eating it every second day. So I wouldn't say that lions are, or hyenas are any more detritivores than lions are. So I think that term is a bit misleading. But when it comes to like earthworms and stuff like that, then yes, you can call them detritivores and decomposers, and cockroaches as well. Cool. We've got like 30 seconds left, guys. So we're going to wrap up for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed the class. There wasn't, as I said, Feliforms are not as extensive as the caniforms, so it was slightly shorter. And I hope you enjoyed your evening. I will chat to you guys on Saturday night. Auf Wiedersehen, adios, arrivederci, bon voyage, auf Wiedersehen, adios, cheers, bye-bye.
Cool.
Cool, Coolosaurus Rex.